We are staying on the story as the Supreme Court has now begun hearing in the Ranveer Allahbadia court case, and the court has asked Allahbadia's counsel if he at all subscribes to the language that was used by him on the show India's Got Latent. The latest that we are getting in from the Supreme Court is some sort of a relief that has now been granted to Ranveer Allahbadia. But for that, let's take this across to my colleague Yesha Kotak, who's through with us on the broadcast. Yesha, we are learning of some sort of a relief as far as freedom from arrest that Allahbadia has now been given by the Supreme Court. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yesha, there's a problem with your audio link. We'll try and re-establish that connection with our colleague Yesha once that audio issue is sorted on our part. But we are learning of a big relief for Ranveer Allahbadia as the Supreme Court has now granted interim protection from arrest in the FIRs related to India's Got Latent controversy. And further, subject to his full cooperation, he won't be accompanied by counsel inside the police station. That is coming out of the Supreme Court. So big relief there for Ranveer Allahbadia, though after very, very scathing observations against him by the Supreme Court of the country, where he had been pulled up by the apex court, which had asked Ranveer Allahbadia whether or not he subscribes to the obscene remarks that he'd made on the show India's Got Latent. What are the parameters for obscenity, he was questioned, and how perversion was something that the Supreme Court said cannot be made or cannot be normalized. But now, despite those scathing observations, there seems to be a big relief, a huge one for Ranveer Allahbadia, as that protection from arrest now has been granted to Ranveer Allahbadia in the FIRs related to the India's Got Latent controversy. Yesha, my colleague, is back with us on the broadcast. Yes, Yesha.
Absolutely, Griha. Like you said, that the court had made a scathing remark. In fact, had come down heavily on Ranveer Allahbadia, questioning the statements that were made by him on the show. However, the counsel for Ranveer Allahbadia, that is Abhinav Chandrachud, happened to mention that he has 2 FIRs against him pending at Mumbai as well as at Guwahati, which is where he mentioned that all he wanted was protection from arrest, that he could adhere to the summons that were issued to him. Now, in fact, when you speak of the summons that have been issued to him, he's also been asked to present before Maharashtra Cyber Cell in the next couple of days, actually on 24th of February. Apart from that, summons at Khar police station are also pending against him. When you speak of at Guwahati, apart from a case against Ranveer Allahbadia, Ashish Chinchnan, he was also one of the promoters of the show, had also moved Guwahati High against this very
Yes.
FIR at Guwahati. Now, of course, all of these have sections related to IT and Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita of city against all of them, in which is where they've been asked to adhere to the summons that have been issued to them, while, of course, Ranveer Allahbadia has been given protection from arrest, but asked to adhere to the summons that have been issued to him by the various agencies.
Right, Yesha, do stay on with us. We have Ananya Bhatnagar, who's now come out of the apex court. He was getting us all the updates from inside the Supreme Court. Ananya, from the observation to now what has come out of the apex court, there is a lot of gap between what we are seeing. A scathing observation by the Supreme Court where they were pulling up Ranveer Allahbadia, to now that interim relief that's been granted to the YouTuber and podcaster.
Well, absolutely. Almost an hour of reprimanding, but finally a relief being granted to Ranveer Allahbadia in this particular case. Very categorically, scathing remarks being by the Supreme Court, completely calling his statements perverse and saying that, there is a height of irresponsibility that he has carried out. They can't, believe that can't believe that some people are so popular that they can say anything. And that is the belief that the Supreme Court stated that should be broken. In fact, it went on to say that there's dirt in his mind and why should a court favor such a person? But the end of it was that, interim relief was granted to Ranveer Allahbadia in this particular case. But massive observations, scathing observations coming in against Allahbadia, completely calling his statements, of some value of where you can see that brothers, sisters, and even parents would be ashamed, is what the Supreme Court has gone on to say. But at the end of it, has granted, kind of a protection to him from arrest in this particular case, and has stated that if at all any FIRs are registered later as well, interim protection shall be granted. However, he has to cooperate fully with the investigation in this particular case, and notice has also been issued to Assam police and Mumbai police with regards to this particular petition that's been filed by Ranveer Allahbadia seeking a clubbing of these investigations and, in fact, an interim protection from arrest which has been granted to him. However, the clubbing of FIR still has to wait. court will be, waiting for the response of the Assam police and the Mumbai police as well.
Also, what about the FIRs that are already slapped against Ranveer Allahbadia? The Supreme Court did say something about how his counsel need not accompany him to the police stations. What is the meaning of that, Ananya?
Well, whenever a person goes for its questioning or, he's called by the police, he's generally accompanied by a lawyer. However, in this particular case, the Supreme Court has very categorically stated that he cannot, take his lawyers along with him. And it is also reprimanded by his lawyers were also reprimanded by the Supreme Court. They're saying that, since they can be afforded, he can afford a particular lawyer, they are now going to the police stations as well. And that is something, that is a scathing observation that came out from the court. But the major was that Justice Suryakant actually went on to say against Ranveer Allahbadia was that, the kind of statements that he has made are something that could shame not only the parents but also, brothers and sisters as well. And that is something, that comes out of the court. But at the end of it, in fact, the interim protection of arrest being granted in the Assam FIR, in the Mumbai FIR, and also in the Jaipur FIR by the Supreme Court itself.
Right. And how odd is this, Ananya? After the Supreme Court coming down heavily on Ranveer Allahbadia, claiming, why should we favor you? This is perversity and we do not support it. They give him an interim relief for freedom from arrest from all these FIRs that have been slapped against him.
Well, the gravity of offence is actually based on, the kind of statements that have been made by, in fact, Ranveer Allahbadia. However, the law somewhere or the other states that, since he's a citizen of the country and there is, in fact, a right to get the FIR clubbed. That is the reason, and there are, various precedents like that of Amish Devgan or Arnab Goswami in that case where, clubbing of FIRs had been done, and that is something for which, in fact, an interim protection until, the court comes out to a final conclusion. This particular protection from arrest has been granted until then. However, this is not a full relief that has been granted. He still has to go before a police station, and this is not, in fact, a regular bail that has been granted. It's just a protection from arrest so that he can go and cooperate with the investigation, the multiple investigations, if I may say, that are being carried out by the Mumbai police, the Assam police, and also the Jaipur police itself.
Ananya, what else transpired in the court? Were there deliberations upon the threats that in turn Ranveer Allahbadia has been receiving after this controversy? Was that discussed as well?
Well, the court definitely said that, these kind of threats should not be given. However, a scathing observation was made against Ranveer Allahbadia in this too, that saying that, the kind of words Allahbadia has used as something, that even the people who are threatening him, their words are even better than Ranveer Allahbadia in that particular case.
Ananya, I was also asking our colleague Arunima this question, that this instance of this particular obscene phrase that was used by Ranveer Allahbadia in this show, India's Got Latent, has in fact, and that exact same phrase has in fact been used by another YouTuber and podcaster in the past. But that was way back when social media wasn't as much of a rage. At that time, this kind of outrage was not really seen. Probably it was not even registered. But now in the case of Ranveer Allahbadia, beer biceps for that matter, because of his popularity, this has gone out of proportion and he has been receiving these threats. So probably people are also getting their own 2 minutes of fame by going ahead and targeting him or probably questioning him on morality and moral grounds. Is that going to be part of observations later once the case comes up for hearing yet again after this interim relief has been granted? Did you really see the proceedings going that way at all?
Well, the observation that would come out from the Supreme Court are only the when the hearing actually takes place again before the topmost of the country. But at this particular point of time, even after, on almost reprimand of an hour, Ranveer Allahbadia has now been granted this particular relief from the Supreme Court of India. He will have to, join the investigation as and when called by the investigating officer. He cannot leave the country without, in fact, informing and taking permission from the court itself. And also, that you need to fully cooperate with the investigation as we carry it.
You were talking about the clubbing of FIRs and Anya. So right now, everything can be handled in Mumbai itself for Ranveer Allahbadia, or will he have to travel to Assam?
He will definitely would have to travel to Assam as and when called by the Assam police. And, though this particular protection from arrest has been granted to him, it might be easier for him to actually appear before the court because at the end of it, he might not be arrested until and unless the police comes back to the Supreme Court, says that, there is a need to arrest him in this particular case and, this interim protection has to go. However, this interim protection stands only until the next date of hearing in this particular case. After, the Mumbai police and the Guwahati police comes back with their responses, there might be, a point of situation where the Supreme Court may deem fit that, this interim protection may no longer be needed for Ranveer Allahbadia in this particular case.
And what about his safety, considering there are threats that he has been receiving while he goes ahead and travels maybe to Assam, to Guwahati for that matter?
So, whenever somebody travels for investigation, it is the duty of the state to actually provide the kind of security based on threat perception against a particular person. If at all, the Assam police or in fact the Mumbai police also feels that somewhere or the other there are some kind of threats or.
Anani, I'm really sorry. I'll interrupt you there. We have Priyanka Chaturvedi of the UBT group who's now with us on the broadcast. Priyanka, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation on CNN News 18. After a reprimand of over an hour, an interim protection from arrest has been given to Ranveer Allahbadia. First of all, how do you see the difference in observations and what has come out of the Supreme Court now?
No, in terms of observation, it is pretty obvious that even the Supreme Court feels outraged about the constitutional norms being weak, where freedom of speech comes with a sense of responsibility and with certain restrictions. So while the comments have been something that everyone would welcome and would also serve as a warning to anyone else who wants to serve content but without any responsibility or without any restrictions. However, interim protection from arrest, I think the Supreme Court has played devil's advocate here and ensured that no further FIRs, which seems to have now become fashionable across all BJP governed states, is reduced. So I would just say let the judicial process take its own course, but it is pretty clear from the comments coming from the Supreme Court that even they do not appreciate what has been happening with regards to content without restriction.
But would you also say that there's a lot of gap between the cup and the lip, because the observations were scathing and still there has been an interim protection as far as the FIRs are concerned that have been granted to Mr. Allahbadia?
I wouldn't want to comment on what the judicial process is in this particular case. The judiciary would have heard all sides and taken a decision. However, law is supreme, and anything that is breached, which is beyond the constitution, needs to be acted upon. And we must remember the sections that are provided under BNS as well as under IT Act also come with bail conditions applicable. So we must keep that in mind before we judge on what the Supreme Court has spoken.
Sure. Priyanka, one final thing I'd like to understand from you. Ever since this controversy is blurted out, there have been so many threats and online, on video, with proper evidence that have been doing the rounds on social media against Ranveer Allahbadia. In fact, he himself had put out a post where he said that people who are in fact, in the garb of playing patients to his mother are entering his mom's clinic, and there's been threat to his family also. Do you think all of this is justified and the Supreme Court should in fact make some observations regarding that, for that matter, or probably it will be coming up in the next hearing? Would you feel so?
No, absolutely, absolutely. Any threat to life or anyone invading someone's privacy due to this controversy should be denounced unequivocally, because law will take its own course. What is happening to Ranveer Allahbadia after the controversy broke out, and if people are breaching his personal space and are coming up with death threats, that is condemnable. But what needs to be understood is that Ranveer Allahbadia and everybody, I mean, he's just become an example of a content creation industry which has been by far creating content which is libelous in nature, which is defamatory in nature, and which also goes beyond the scope of freedom of speech. So that is something that should serve as a warning to everybody, that there is enough scope for content creation. You do not need to be abusive. You do not need to indulge in slander or create jokes which go beyond the norms of society and beyond, which questions how the family equations are. So those are things which need to be kept in mind. The perversity with which they spoke and the entertainment that the audience was getting. We are also seeing an audience which gets entertained with this kind of humor.
Right. And Priyanka, the court also observed that this is height of irresponsibility, like you rightly said. Because he is popular, he cannot go ahead and say whatever he said on that particular show. So do you think with this particular observation by the Supreme Court, there is going to be ground that now is going to be laid on the regulation of online content and whatever is being served to people so openly on social media?
So from whatever I understand is there are enough and more regulations that are in place. It is the implementation which is the key problem here. And regulations in the sense we would hope that people would understand their responsibility, content creators would understand their responsibility. And even these platforms which use their algorithm on the basis of how much controversy and eyeballs it can grab. The more eyeballs they grab, the more controversy they create, ends up raking in more revenue. For these content creators. I think that is also a model which needs to be relooked. So there are regulations in place. Implementation of that regulation must understand whether it is Mr. Allahbadia or anybody else were felicitated by none other than the Prime Minister themselves. So after being felicitated by the highest authority of the land, for you to behave so irresponsibly, I think that in itself speaks about wanting to make money but without any responsibility or accountability. That should be a message which goes across the length and breadth of this country.
Absolutely. Priyanka Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us. Some great amount of power that Ranveer Allahbadia has with the kind of following that he in fact boasts of on social media, and he needs to exercise that amount of power with that equal amount of responsibility, and that's something that the Supreme Court had also observed before granting him that interim relief. My colleague Ananya Bhatnagar also continues to be with us on the broadcast. Ananya, we were talking about this interim relief that's being granted to Ranveer Allahbadia by the Supreme Court. When it is about his word or his plea, what exactly did that plea entail when it was submitted before the Apex Court?
Well, this particular petition that has been filed by Ranveer Allahbadia in this particular case sought a clubbing of the FIRs that have been registered against him. On that note, the Supreme Court has issued notice to the Mumbai police and, in fact, the Guwahati police as well. Remember, Ranveer Allahbadia, represented by, Abhinav Chandrachud, has, in fact, stated before the court that according to the judgment in Arnab Goswami's case, also in Amish Devgan's case, has set a precedent, if at all multiple FIRs are registered against you, for the benefit of, joining those investigations, a clubbing of FIRs can actually take place and the probe can go on in a particular, at a particular place, one place with regards to same offences. But at the same point of time, the Supreme Court also reprimanded Ranveer Allahbadia as far as his statements were concerned, calling his statements not only perverse, but saying that, there is dirt in his mind. And that has come out particularly on this particular show is what, in fact, the Supreme Court had to say. But at the end of it, after all those scathing observations being made against Ranveer Allahbadia, it ended up as a big relief for him with the interim protection from arrest being granted in this particular case against him and various others, including Samay, Raina, Apoorva, Mukhija, aka the Rebel Kid, and in fact the makers of that particular show, India Got Latent. In fact, a very important instruction that has been given up by the Supreme Court is that until further orders of the Supreme Court, Ranveer Allahbadia and others, including his associates, cannot in fact go on air and issue go onto any kind of a show and publish any kind of a show, and the kind of profession they are in. This is also a big setback coming in for Ranveer Allahbadia as far as this particular case is concerned.
Right, Ananya, do stay on with us. We also have activist Rahul Ishwar, who's joining us on the broadcast. Rahul, very good morning to you. The scathing observation on the obscenity on part of Ranveer Allahbadia that the Supreme Court spoke about before granting him that interim protection in the FIRs that have been slapped against him. What do you make of those?
As a complainant, I am extremely happy. This is extremely a victory for all those people who believe in culture, family values and all. And please remember, nobody wants to hurt or cause damage to beer biceps. We only want a course correction. And Supreme Court did the brilliant, balanced approach in it. Supreme Court granted him all the necessary protection at the same point of time. Had scathing remarks. I cannot recently recall any observation or verdict where Supreme Court has came down so heavily on a person. They used this word like dirt. They used the word, absolutely scathing. The word like harsh words Supreme Court has used. So it's a victory for all of us because we all like Ranveer on one personal scale, but he has crossed that line. He and many of the henchmen the Supreme Court calls has crossed the line. So I hope this will be a course correction for all the YouTubers. Course correction for all the influencers. They should know in the guise of grabbing eyeballs, you cannot say anything and everything. There are some Lakshmana Rekhas that need to be crossed. Every faith, every family value should be respected and it should not cross the line. So Supreme Court has given a brilliant verdict. That's a very sensitive balance.
Right. And Rahul, when you had posted that complaint against Ranveer Allahbadia, were you expecting the kind of retaliation from all quarters that the YouTuber is now receiving, and that includes threats to his life? Did you expect this sort of a thing as well?
No, I know. See, we are normal Indians. We feel offended when somebody takes insult to the family. See, we have all people who have grown up hearing Mata, Pita, Guru, Deva. Then Mata and Pita or their father and mother and using some sex joke is absolutely perverse. They cannot even think, regarding that. In my family, I didn't even show my complaint because I don't want my kids to even read the complaint of such a thing. So there's an absolute red line that he should not have crossed. One. Second, if there are any death threats he's receiving, that's absolutely wrong. And please remember, no one should abuse his mother or father. They are absolutely not at guilt. If somebody is doing that, we are doing the same mistake that Ranveer has done. So mother, father, family is absolutely off limits of everyone of everyone. So I would urge Ranveer Allahbadia, when the court permits, to do a podcast with his parents, ask for forgiveness, come back and start a good second innings, because nobody wants our youngsters being destroyed. We only request it to be channelized. They are brilliant youngsters, whether it is a liberal Dhruv Rathi or whether it is a Ranveer Allahbadia who leans towards right. They are brilliant youngsters, content creators. They are pride of our orange economy. But when they have done such a grave mistake, it cannot be that simply forgiven. They have to face the music. They have to be penalized. They have to have that medicine. So this is a course correction, and Supreme Court has to reflect the sentiment of every Indian. Supreme Court, we are very happy that Supreme Court has came down so heavily and used such harsh words. I hope these harsh words will be golden words and golden boundaries that will be etched in the mind of all future YouTube influencers and people who are content creators.
But Rahul, don't you think it's easier said than done? You're talking about exemplary observation that's coming in from the apex court of the country and how this must serve as a course correction for all the YouTubers who function within the ambit of India. But the kind of content that is online, and in fact, even in Ranveer Allahbadia's case, there have been many from Generation Now who ended up supporting what he had said. Isn't that very concerning? Okay, we seem to have lost that link with Rahul Ishwar. Rahul Ishwar, remember, was one of the complainants against Ranveer Allahbadia, where he had put out that inappropriate comment on Samay Raina's show, India's Got Latent. And now he has got some sort of a relief, an interim relief by the Supreme Court as far as the FIRs that have been slapped against him.